This album contains material which a truly free society would neither fear nor suppress. In some socially retarded areas, religious fanatics and ultra-conservative political organizations violate your First Amendment rights by attempting to censor rock and roll albums. We feel this is unconstitutional and un-American. As an alternative to these government-supported programs designed to keep you docile and ignorant, Barking Pumpkin is pleased to provide stimulating digital audio entertainment for those of you who have outgrown the ordinary. The language and concepts contained herein are guaranteed not to cause eternal torment in the place where the guy with the horns and the pointed stick conducts his business. This guarantee is as real as the threats of the video fundamentalists who use attacks on rock music in their attempt to transform America into a nation of check-mailing nincompoops in the name of Jesus Christ. If there is a hell, its fires wait for them, not us.
Hello. My name is Michael, and I obsess. I come across something that grabs me and I consume until I can't take it anymore, and then I'm on to the next. Some obsessions last a week, others a lifetime. It is my intention to explore these obsessions with you as they occur while the passion is hot. Welcome to Eclectic Obsessions. In 1985, I was 16 years old. Music was my all-consuming passion, and anyone in authority was the enemy. Enter into this mix a group of senators' wives with an agenda and a potential authority to censor music. We will be exploring the Parents Music Resource Center on this episode of Eclectic Obsessions.
These companies and some of these artists are engaged in cultural strip mining. They are selling explicit sex and violence to younger and younger kids. The concern really is preteens and young teenagers, and they don't seem to care about any scars they leave. They take the money and they run. There are themes of sadomasochism, rape, incest, explicit and graphic sexuality in lyrics and in some of the concert acts to an audience of children of any age. And parents have a right to be informed about these changes in content.
Do kids really hear the lyrics? Do they really care what the lyrics say? And for the most part, most kids really like that kind of stuff?
I think kids do listen to the lyrics. Of course, there's some kids that may not, and I think one of the main attractions to any kind of music is that you like the sound. But the lyrics are not unimportant, and the kids nowadays will listen with Walkmans, headsets. That makes lyrics far more distinguishable than in the past. And video now presents a visual image to a song. In fact, some artists don't even like that because it changes the interpretation of the song. It creates an interpretation. Kids know very well what's going on, and the grapevine among the kids that are 9, 10, 11 over explicit lyrics or violent lyrics is as good as it was when I was a kid. They're very tuned in. It's the adults who are not. It's the parents who don't realize some of these changes.
Yeah. If a kid were listening to our conversation right now, chances are you'd go, oh, those are just parents, those are just grown-ups, they don't know what they're talking about, they just want to cash in on my fun. But in fact, are we finding rock music the new pornography?
I think that we can find, unfortunately, some very explicit sexuality, and some people would call it pornography, in some of the rock music. Yes, it has become a cheap industrial ingredient. Naturally, it sells to the kids. They're very curious. They probably are rather shocked that this is being promoted to them, and yet they don't have the judgment of somebody older.
Well, we were looking on that clip just a moment ago about the Beastie Boys, and there's the publicity that has come out about them taking nude girls on the stage, actually inviting oral sex in front of the concert goers, a phallic symbol the size of, 12 feet high. These kinds of things are obviously done for publicity. They're obviously done for making money and getting attention. What are the age of kids going to these kind of concerts?
Well, the new development is exactly what you said, that they would do these graphic things on stage. But also, it's the fact that they're 7, 8, they're 9, 10, 11-year-old kids in the audience. They themselves are quoted in Newsweek magazine as saying, well, we just want to have fun for all the little 13-year-old girls that buy our albums. Well, they know exactly who they're appealing to, 13-year-olds. In some cases, younger. The parents that were outraged at some of those concerts where the acts were going on stage had taken their 9 and 10-year-old kids to the concert.
Without knowing what they were about to see.
Of course not knowing.
Yeah. We've got some pictures that were printed recently in a teen magazine or in several different kinds of teen magazines, just to give you an idea of what your teenager may be looking at. This is what?
I'll tell you, this is a group called Judas Priest, and this is their promotional, this is the way they promote themselves in a teen magazine, Hit Parader. They had a song about forcing oral sex at gunpoint on an album that sold 2 million copies, primarily to preteens and young adolescents.
Forcing
oral sex at gunpoint on an album called Defenders of the Faith. The song is called Eat Me Alive. This is a man called Blackie Lawless, lead singer of a group called Wasp. His stage act has consisted of chaining a woman naked from the waist up to a torture rack and pretending to slit her throat.
This is entertainment? This is what our kids are looking at for entertainment?
Yes. And I think it's time that adults woke up to this fact.
What does that tell you about this society? What does it tell you about our kids? Are we becoming so numbed as a generation that this doesn't affect us anymore? It doesn't affect our children?
My message is that it should affect us very strongly to take action to make sure that these groups at least inform parents or people in the marketplace about their acts.
Do you seriously believe that groups like that would do something so socially wholesome as informing parents what they're doing?
Well, for example, Blackie Lawless of the group Wasp have an album out and it now bears a warning label, explicit lyrics, parental advisory. I think that there's still a lot of work to be done in the area of concerts. There's no information there for parents, and we need that. But one of the dangers of violent entertainment is that it desensitizes us and that we are raising our children on a massive diet of violence and television, movies. Look at the movies that are popular. Cobra, Commando. Television violence in the early evening hours is at an all-time high, according to George Gerbner, who studies this. He's at the University of Pennsylvania. We need to ask ourselves, what are we teaching our children? And pay attention to the experts, the psychologists, the National Council of Churches, and others who are saying we need to reduce the levels of violence in our entertainment because our children are becoming desensitized to it.
And we as a society seem to be becoming desensitized to it unless we do something about it, unless we listen, unless we see, unless we watch what we're doing. I am amazed. I mean, from what I have seen, my times of growing up in the 60s, no one thought you could probably get much worse than that, but it is much worse than that.
It is worse. I grew up in the 60s, and I'd like to say I like rock music, and particularly to kids that are listening and to parents. It's not a question of style, it's a question of content and values, and parents need to tune in to their children's world and understand what they're attracted to and talk with them about it and use it as a tool of communication. But they really need to understand how drastically the content has changed in some of the music.
There were several pictures for teenagers in those teen magazines that we could not show our audience. We could not put it on television. They were so gross. They were so graphic. And this is teenage material. The book, if you'd like to know more and like to do a little bit about being more informed, the name of the book is Raising PG Kids in an X-Rated Society by Tipper Gore. And I would commend you to read it. Tipper, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate you being.
The Parents Music Resource Center, or PMRC, was an American committee formed in 1985 with the stated goal of increasing parental awareness and control over children's access to music deemed to have violent, drug-related, or sexual themes via labeling albums with parental advisory stickers. The committee was founded by 4 women who came to be known as the Washington Wives, a reference to their husbands' connections with government in the Washington, D.C. area. The women who founded the PMRC are Tipper Gore, wife of Senator and later Vice President Al Gore, Susan Baker, wife of Treasury Secretary James Baker, Pam Howar, wife of Washington realtor Raymond Howar, and Sally Nevius, wife of former Washington City Council Chairman John Nevius. The PMRC eventually grew to include 22 participants before shutting down in the mid to late 1990s. As a method of combating this alleged problem, the PMRC suggested a voluntary move by the Recording Industry Association of America and the music industry to develop guidelines and/or a rating system similar to the MPAA film rating system. Additional suggestions from the PMRC that appeared in an article in the Washington Post included printing warnings and lyrics on album covers, forcing record stores to put albums with explicit covers under the counters, pressuring television stations not to broadcast explicit songs or videos, reassessing the contracts of musicians who performed violently or sexually in concert, and creating a panel to set industry standards. In 1985, the PMRC issued a list of 15 songs, nicknamed the Filthy 15, which it deemed particularly objectionable and deserving of being banned from radio airplay. The Filthy 15 are comprised of Prince's Darling Nikki for sex and masturbation, Sheena Easton's Sugar Walls for sex, Judas Priest's Eat Me Alive for sex and violence, Vanity's Strap-On Robbie Baby for sex, Motley Crue's Bastard for violence and language, AC/DC's Let Me Put My Love Into You for sex, Twisted Sister's We're Not Gonna Take It for violence, Madonna's Dress You Up for sex, Wasp's Animal for sex, language, and violence, Def Leppard's High and Dry for drug and alcohol use, Merciful Fate's Into the Coven for occult, Black Sabbath's Trashed for drug and alcohol use, Mary Jane Girls in My House for sex, Venom's Possessed for occult, and Cyndi Lauper's She-Bop for sex and masturbation.
We're not talking about banning or censoring the content. As graphic and as violent as it can be, I would defend its right to exist. However, this material is being aggressively marketed to younger and younger children, preteens and young teens, and they're being exposed to what I would call mature themes: sadomasochism, thrill killing, songs glorifying incest, and songs glorifying rape.
In August of 1985, 19 record companies agreed to put parental guidance explicit lyrics labels on albums to warn consumers of explicit lyrical content. Before the labels could be put into place, however, the Senate agreed to hold a hearing on so-called porn rock. This began on September 19, 1985, when representatives from the PMRC, 3 musicians, Dee Snider, Frank Zappa, and John Denver, and Senators Paula Hawkins and Al Gore, testified before the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee on the subject of the content of certain sound recordings and suggestions that recording packages be labeled to provide a warning to prospective purchasers of sexually explicit or other potentially offensive content.
The reason for this hearing is not to promote any legislation. Indeed, I don't know of any suggestion that any legislation be passed, but to simply provide a forum for airing the issue itself, for ventilating the issue, for bringing it out in the public domain. With respect to the content of the statements, to describe what's in the music that's in question will, I'm sure, require some witnesses to use words and describe things that will shock the sensitivities of many of us in this room and many who are watching these proceedings on television. And I just wanted to warn you of that in advance so that children have the TV on, they can, or their parents can know what's in store for them.
Paula Hawkins presented 3 record covers: Pyromania by Def Leppard, WOW by Wendy O. Williams, and Wasp by Wasp, and the music videos for Hot for Teacher by Van Halen and We're Not Gonna Take It by Twisted Sister, commenting, "Much has changed since Elvis's seemingly innocent times. Subtleties, suggestions, and innuendo have given way to overt expressions and descriptions of often violent sexual acts, drug-taking, and flirtations with the occult. The record album covers to me are self-explanatory."
Much has changed since Elvis' seemingly innocent times. The record album covers to me are self-explanatory. And I'd like to show the sampling of a record cover. Pyromania, no question. Burn a building. Burn, burn, burn. Porn rock. It's my life. And I love sex. With obviously a lot of fire and chains and other objectionable tools of gratification in some twisted minds.
Susan Baker testified that there certainly are many causes for these ills in our society, but it is our contention that the pervasive messages aimed at children which promote and glorify suicide, rape, sadomasochism, and so on have to be numbered among the contributing factors.
The outrageous edge of rock and roll has shifted its focus from Elvis's pelvis to the saw protruding from Blackie Lawless's codpiece on a Wasp album. There is a new element of vulgarity, violence, and brutality to women that is unprecedented.
Tipper Gore asked record companies to voluntarily place a warning label on music products inappropriate for younger children due to explicit sexual or violent lyrics.
We are asking the recording industry to voluntarily assist parents who are concerned by placing a warning label on music products inappropriate for younger children due to explicit sexual or violent lyrics.
National PTA Vice President for Legislative Activity Millie Waterman related the PTA's role in the debate and proposed printing the symbol R on the cover of recordings containing explicit sexual language, violence, profanity, the occult, and glorification of drugs and alcohol, and providing lyrics for R-rated albums.
The National PTA in no way would encourage or support censorship, but we are asking that warning labels be voluntarily placed upon the package and it be undertaken by the music industry themselves.
In addition, Dr. Joe Stussy, a music professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio, spoke regarding the power of music to influence behavior. He argued that heavy metal was different from earlier forms of music such as jazz and rock and roll because it was church music and had one of its central elements, the element of hatred.
Today's heavy metal music is categorically different from previous forms of popular music. It contains the element of hatred, a meanness of spirit. I know personally of no form of popular music before which has had as one of its central elements the element of hatred. I hope that this committee will find a way to send a message to the industry. Clean up your act or we will do it for you. In the words of the heavy metal band Twisted Sister, we're not going to take it anymore.
Dr. Paul King, a child and adolescent psychiatrist, testified on the deification of heavy metal musicians and to the presentation of heavy metal as a religion. He also stated that many adolescents read deeply into song lyrics.
Nearly all of my patients worship heavy metal music. Heavy metal portrays the power, and glory of evil. Adolescents with emotional and/or drug problems, which I treat every day, become further involved in delinquent behavior, violence, acts of cruelty, and Satan worship. The glamorization of violence, sex, and drugs leads to further problems with directing young people's attitudes.
Musician John Denver stated he was strongly opposed to censorship of any kind in our society or anywhere else in the world, and that in his experience censors often misinterpret music, as was the case with his song Rocky Mountain High. In addition, Denver expressed his belief that censorship is counterproductive. That which is denied becomes that which is most desired, and that which is hidden becomes that which is most interesting. Consequently, a great deal of time and energy is spent trying to get at what is being kept from you. When Denver came up to give his speech, many on the PMRC board expected him to side with them, thinking he would be offended by the lyrics as well.
Honorable Chairman, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor and a privilege to appear before you this morning and to take advantage of the opportunity given me in our free society to speak my mind. I'm here to address the issue of a possible rating system in the recording industry, labeling records where excesses of explicit sex or graphic violence have occurred, and furthermore references to drugs and alcohol or the occult are included in the lyrics. These hearings have been called to determine whether or not the government should intervene to enforce this practice. Mr. Chairman, this would approach censorship. May I be very clear that I am strongly opposed to censorship of any kind in our society or anywhere else in the world. Discipline and self-restraint, when practiced by an individual, a family, or a company, is an effective way to deal with this issue. The same thing when forced on a people by their government, or worse, by a self-appointed watchdog of public morals, is suppression and will not be tolerated in a democratic society. Mr. Chairman, the suppression of a people, or of a society, begins, in my mind, with the censorship of the written or spoken word. It was so in Nazi Germany. It is so in many places today where those in power are afraid of the consequences of an informed and educated people. In a mature and incredibly diverse society such as ours, the access to all perspectives of an issue becomes more and more important. Those things which in our experience are undesirable generally prove to be unfurthering and sooner or later become boring. That process cannot and should not be stifled. On the other hand, that which is denied becomes that which is most interesting. Consequently, a great deal of time and energy is spent trying to get at what is being kept from you. Our children, our people, our society, and the world cannot afford this waste. I would like to acknowledge the PMRC for bringing this issue to the attention of not only our industry, but our government and our people. It is obvious that we are dealing with a real problem which warrants our concern. I would like to point out, however, that we address ourselves not to the problem, but to the symptoms. I suggest that explicit lyrics and graphic videos are not so far removed from what is seen on television every day and night, whether it be in the soap operas or on the news. The problem, Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, has to do with our willingness as parents to take responsibility for the upbringing of our children, to pay attention to their interest, to respond to their needs, and to recognize that we as parents and as individuals have a greater influence on our children and on each other than anything else could possibly have. I'm a father of 2 children, both adopted. I have a lot of friends in the music business, other rock performers who have children also. And all of them, including myself, we have a great concern for our children. That's why I'm here today. We can turn this around, sir. We can address the reality of a problem and not deal with just the symptoms, and create not only a better world for our children, but for ourselves and all of humanity.
I think that the oral atmosphere developing in this particular hearing that the committee's on trial and make darn sure we don't do nothing ought to transmit rather back to the original problem. Filth, pornography, suicide, all this other stuff coming out of these records. Now, the other gentleman, Zappa, said, print the words. I rather like that, since I wouldn't have to read it. He would read it one way, obviously, and I would read it differently. And there is that human error involved. Do you have any recommendation for the committee other than just do nothing?
No, sir, I'm not saying do nothing, and that is exactly why I'm here and why I applaud this hearing and applaud what these ladies, what the PMRC has presented to us.
Well, I think we've got to be sensible about it, but there is, like you say, particularly with at least the radio and TV, I can't read the words coming there. I can see that difference between Mr. Zappa and myself. If persons of free volition can go in and read the language and see the words there, I wouldn't have to read it. But then, to not have some inhibition, some kind of discipline, as you describe it, within the broadcast media, then we've flunked the course, because there are 6 hours of that thing steaming and beaming into the homes.
Well, you know, Senator, excuse me if I'm interrupting.
No, sir, not. I'm trying to...
When I was raised, television was just coming out, and golly, it was an attractive medium, and I could sit there in front of that TV set and watch it all day. My parents had some restrictions on how much time I could watch television during the week, especially when I was going to school, and I could choose the programs that I wanted to watch. And I think that this is kind of an influence that we can exercise as parents on our children. Just because it's on 7 hours doesn't mean our kids are going to get to sit there and watch it that whole time.
You and I are different. I mean, you and I are the same. We don't watch. I don't watch that much television, obviously, but the record is otherwise. They watch in television as much as instruction in the classroom in the public schools and more. All surveys show that. So it's being watched. So that's the fact. And living in the real world, where you and I would like to restrict our children, or me, my grandchildren now, it's a real problem. It's a real problem, and I guess you know from being a master at the art, the way you start off selling that record is get it accepted at some good programming, some good broadcasting, and then the sales follow. And you can't print those words ahead of time, so I'll know to cut the television off quick or whatever it is, unless that discipline develops, in other words, with the broadcast media. We are going to be forced somewhere with regulation through the FCC or otherwise. I don't think the American public is going to go along just with a nice hearing up in Washington today. I think there's going to have to be something more developed of some kind of discipline, as you indicate, and I'm trying to find out from you, how do you develop that discipline a little bit better than what has been developed?
Well, I think that you know, a good beginning to addressing this real problem is this hearing that is taking place. What most concerns me, aside from potential legislation which might be enacted, which we have said which we've heard today is not going to be the case, is that the whole presentation made by the PMRC comes from, in my experience, a foundation of fear. The only thing we have to fear, as President Roosevelt said, is fear itself. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of what my children might see. I'm not afraid of anything that might be shown them or done in their presence that would lessen my influence on them or their opportunity to grow up and be fine, upstanding adults and perhaps someday serve in this very august body.
Well, most respectfully, President Roosevelt never heard these records.
Senator Gore.
I think the things that he heard were far worse, sir.
Senator Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be able to ask some questions. I've been a fan for a long time, Mr. Denver, and not only of your music, but also of your contributions to efforts like Farm Aid at the present time, and also world peace and your trips to the Soviet Union and elsewhere. Do you see the kind of trend in some rock music that is outlined by this presentation? Have you ever been to a Motley Crue concert, for example?
No, sir.
Do you agree that there does seem to be a growing trend in the, at least in the heavy metal area, that emphasizes explicit violence and sex and sadomasochism and the rest? You're aware of that music, aren't you?
Yes.
Why do you think that has been growing in popularity?
Again, sir, my experience, not only in this country but all over the world, is that music today is the medium which most specifically tells us what's going on in young people's minds. Not what's being put into them, but what reflects what they're interested in. I think that this addresses itself to a much graver problem, in fact, the source of the symptom that we're discussing here today.
Well, I mean, if a 10-year-old listens to a song glorifying rape, that's not reflecting what is in that 10-year-old's mind, is it?
I don't think so. I'm not sure that there are many 10-year-olds who know what rape is.
Well, I'm not sure I would agree with that. If you have an explicit description of a suicide, for example, and a song that seems to glorify and promote suicide, that's not. I mean, young people are aware of that.
Mr. Gore, Senator, excuse me for interrupting.
Sure.
If I could count the number of times that a mother or father has come up to me, or a child has come up to me and says, if I don't get your autograph, my mother's going to kill me. If I don't get your autograph, my daughter's going to kill me.
Yeah.
You know,
well, you see a difference.
This is a part of our language, and there might be a slight difference, but I don't think it's as big as you point out. You know, the way this video that we watched here today, I think is probably a fantasy that every kid has about his father at some point in time. It may not be exactly those particular graphics. It may be out in the farm, being able to take your dad out and put a board to his fanny. But this goes on. This is a part of growing up, and our society has gotten increasingly complex. There are many more images to reach from. They all have an impact on a child's mind, and I'm saying that the small percentage of records that we're discussing here today, compared to the 125,000 songs that are released every year, is minuscule and is not going to affect our children to a degree that we need be fearful of. We need to be conscious of it. We must concern ourselves, and we need to communicate with our children and have them feel comfortable with communicating with us.
Well, let me come back to the question about suicide. Let's say you have a popular rock star who has a lot of fans, who sings a song that says suicide is the solution, and appears in fan magazines with a gun barrel pointed in his mouth, and promotes material that seems to glorify suicide. Here we have one of the highest rates of teen suicide of any country in the world, the rate has gone up 300% in the last decade among young people, while it's remained constant among adults. Do you think it's a responsible act for a record company to put out a song glorifying suicide, and for the artist to promote the album by putting a gun in his mouth in a suicidal, in a simulation of suicide?
I would not like to be the one to tell a record company or an artist what to do. I certainly think the picture that you describe is deplorable, and if I found that in my home, I would talk to my kids about it and get rid of it.
During his statement, musician and producer Frank Zappa asserted that the PMRC proposal is an ill-conceived piece of nonsense which fails to deliver any real benefits to children, infringes the civil liberties of people who are not children, and promises to keep the courts busy for years dealing with the interpretation and enforcement problems inherent in the proposal's design. He went on to state his suspicion that the hearings were a front for H.R. 2911, a proposed blank tape tax. The major record labels need to have H.R. 2911 whiz through a few committees before anybody smells a rat. One of them is chaired by Senator Thurmond. Is it a coincidence that Mrs. Thurmond is affiliated with the PMRC?
Mr. Zappa, thank you very much for being with us. Please proceed.
Okay, my name is Frank Zappa. This is my attorney, Larry Stein. Certain things have happened. I've been listening to the event in the other room, and I've heard some conflicting reports as to whether or not people in this committee want legislation. I understand that Mr. Hollings does from his comments. Is that correct?
I think you better concentrate on your testimony rather than asking questions of the committee.
The reason I need to ask
Zappa.
it because I have to change something in my testimony if there is not a clear-cut version of whether or not legislation is what is being discussed here.
This is one senator that might be interested in legislation and or regulation to some extent, recognizing the problems with free right of expression and my previously expressed views that I don't believe I should be telling other people what they have to listen to. But I really believe that the suggestions made by the original panel was some kind of an arrangement for voluntarily policing this in the music industry is the correct way to go. So if it'll help you out in your testimony, I might join Senator Hollings or others in some kind of legislation and or regulation unless the free enterprise system, both the producers and you as the performers, see fit to clean up your act.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's hardly voluntary. These are my personal observations and opinions. I speak on behalf of no group or professional organization. The PMRC proposal is an ill-conceived piece of nonsense which fails to deliver any real benefits to children, infringes the civil liberties of people who are not children, and promises to keep the courts busy for years dealing with the interpretational and enforcemental problems inherent in the proposal's design. It is my understanding that, in law, First Amendment issues are decided with a preference for the least restrictive alternative. In this context, the PMRC demands are the equivalent of treating dandruff by decapitation. No one has forced Mrs. Baker or Mrs. Gore to bring Prince or Sheena Easton into their homes. Thanks to the Constitution, they are free to buy other forms of music for their children. Apparently, they insist on purchasing the works of contemporary recording artists in order to support a personal illusion of aerobic sophistication. Ladies, please be advised, the $8.98 purchase price does not entitle you to a kiss on the foot from the composer or performer in exchange for a spin on the family Victrola. Taken as a whole, the complete list of PMRC demands reads like an instruction manual for some sinister kind of toilet training program to housebreak all composers and performers because of the lyrics of a few. Ladies, how dare you? The ladies' shame must be shared by the bosses of the major labels who, through the RIAA, chose to bargain away the rights of composers, performers, and retailers in order to pass H.R. 2911, the blank tape tax. A private tax levied by an industry on consumers for the benefit of a select group within that industry. Is this a consumer issue? You bet it is. The major record labels need to have H.R. 2911 whiz through a few committees before anybody smells a rat. One of them is chaired by Senator Thurmond. Is it a coincidence that Mrs. Thurmond is affiliated with the PMRC? I can't say she's a member because the PMRC has no members. Their secretary told me on the phone last Friday that the PMRC has no members, only founders. I asked how many other DC wives are non-members of an organization that raises money by mail, has a tax-exempt status, and seems intent on running the Constitution of the United States through the family paper shredder. I asked her if it was a cult. Finally, she said she couldn't give me an answer and that she had to call their lawyer. While the wife of the Secretary of Treasury recites, "Gonna drive my love inside you," and Senator Gore's wife talks about bondage and oral sex at gunpoint on the CBS Evening News, people in high places work on a tax bill that is so ridiculous, the only way to sneak it through is to keep the public's mind on something else. Porn rock. Is the basic issue morality? Is it mental health? Is it an issue at all? The PMRC has created a lot of confusion with improper comparisons between song lyrics, videos, record packaging, radio broadcasting, and live performances. These are all different mediums, and the people who work in them have a right to conduct their business without trade-restraining legislation whipped up like an instant pudding by the wives of Big Brother. Is it proper that the husband of a PMRC non-member founder person sits on any committee considering business pertaining to the blank tape tax or his wife's lobbying organization? Can any committee thus constituted find facts in a fair and unbiased manner? This committee has three that we know about: Senator Danforth, Senator Packwood, and Senator Gore. For some reason, they seem to feel there is no conflict of interest involved. Children in the vulnerable age bracket have a natural love for music. If, as a parent, you believe they should be exposed to something more uplifting than sugar walls, support music appreciation programs in schools. Why haven't you considered your child's need for consumer information? Music appreciation costs very little compared to sports expenditures. Your children have a right to know that something besides pop music exists. It is unfortunate that the PMRC would rather dispense governmentally sanitized heavy metal music than something more uplifting. Is this an indication of PMRC's personal taste, or just another manifestation of the low priority this administration has placed on education for the arts in America? The answer, of course, is neither. You can't distract people from thinking about an unfair tax by talking about music appreciation. For that, you need sex, and lots of it. The establishment of a rating system, voluntary or otherwise, opens the door to an endless parade of moral quality control programs based on things certain Christians don't like. What if the next bunch of Washington wives demands a large yellow J on all material written or performed by Jews in order to save helpless children from exposure to concealed Zionist doctrine? Record ratings are frequently compared to film ratings. Apart from the quantitative difference, there is another that is more important. People who act in films are hired to pretend. No matter how the film is rated, it won't hurt them personally. Since many musicians write and perform their own material and stand by it as their art, whether you like it or not, an imposed rating will stigmatize them as individuals. How long before composers and performers are told to wear a festive little PMRC armband with their scarlet letter on it? Bad facts make bad law, and people who write bad laws are, in my opinion, more dangerous than songwriters who celebrate sexuality, freedom of speech, freedom of religious thought, and the right to due process for composers, performers, and retailers are imperiled if the PMRC and the major labels consummate this nasty bargain. Are we expected to give up Article 1 so the big guys can collect an extra $1 on every blank tape and 10 to 25% on tape recorders? What's going on here? Do we get to vote on this tax? I think that this whole matter has gotten completely blown out of proportion, and I agree with Senator Exxon that there is a very dubious reason for having this event. And I also agree with Senator Exxon that you shouldn't be wasting time on stuff like this, because from the beginning I have sensed that it is somebody's hobby project. I've got an idea for a way to stop all this stuff and a way to give parents what they really want, which is accurate information as to what is inside the album without providing a stigma for the musicians who have played on the album or the people who sing it or the people who wrote it. And I think that if you listen carefully to this idea, that it might just get by all the constitutional problems and everything else as far as I'm concerned. I have no objection to having all of the lyrics placed on the album routinely, all the time. But there is a little problem. Record companies do not own the right automatically to take these lyrics because they're owned by publishing companies. So just as all the rest of the PMRC proposals would cost money, this would cost money too, because the record companies would need, they shouldn't be forced to bear the cost of the extra expenditure to the publisher to print those lyrics. If you consider that the public needs to be warned about the contents of the records, what better way than to let them see exactly what the songs say? That way you don't have to put any kind of subjective rating on the record. You don't have to call it R, X, D, A, anything. You can read it for yourself. But in order for it to work properly, the lyrics should be on a uniform kind of a sheet. Maybe even the government could print those sheets. Maybe it should even be paid for by the government if the government is interested in making sure that people have consumer information in this regard. You also have to realize that if a person buys the record and takes it out of the store, once it's out of the store, you can't return it if you read the lyrics at home and decide that little Johnny is not supposed to have it. I think that should at least be considered, and the idea of imposing these ratings on live concerts, on the albums, asking record companies to reevaluate or drop or violate contracts that they already have with artists should be thrown out. That's it all. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zappa. You understand that the previous witnesses were not asking for legislation, and I don't know, I can't speak for Senator Hollings, but I think that the prevailing view here is that nobody's asking for legislation. The question is just focusing on what a lot of people perceive to be a problem, and you've indicated that you at least understand that there is another point of view.
Yeah, I do
and
understand.
that there are people who think that, parents should have some knowledge of what goes into their home.
All along, my objection has been with the tactics used by these people in order to achieve the goal. I just think that the tactics have been really bad. And the whole premise of their proposal, they were badly advised in terms of record business law. They were badly advised in terms of practicality, or they would have known that certain things don't work mechanically with what they suggested.
Senator Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I found your statement very interesting, and let me say, although I disagree with some of the statements that you make and have made on other occasions, I have been a fan of your music, believe it or not. I respect you as a true original and a tremendously talented musician. Your suggestion on printing the lyrics on the album is a very interesting one, because the PMRC at one point said they would propose either a rating or printing all the lyrics on the album. And the record companies came back and said that they didn't want to do that. But I think an awful lot of people agree with your suggestion that one easy way to solve this problem for parents would be to put the actual words there so that parents could see them. I think your suggestion is an intriguing one and might really be a solution for the problem.
Well, you just have to understand that it does cost money, because you can't expect publishers to automatically give up that right, which is a money-earning right for them. Somebody's going to have to reimburse the publishers. The record industry is going to, without trying to mess up the album jacket art and impose the lyrics only be printed on the back, it should be a sheet of paper that is slipped inside the shrink wrap that when you take it out, you can still have a complete album package. So there's going to be some extra cost for printing it. But as long as people realize that for this kind of consumer safety, you're going to spend some money, and as long as you can find a way to pay for it, I think that would be the best way to let people know.
Well, I don't disagree with that at all, and the separate sheet would also solve the problem with cassettes as well, because you don't have the space for words on the cassette packs, and a very large percentage of the albums now sold are sold in cassette form. I've listened to you a number of times on this issue. I guess the statement that I want to get from you is on whether or not you feel that the concern is legitimate, because occasionally you feel very strongly about your position. I understand that. But occasionally you give the impression that you think parents are just silly to be concerned at all.
First of all, I think it is the parents' concern. It is not the government's concern.
Yeah, they agree with you on that.
Well, that doesn't come across in the way they have been speaking. The whole drift that I've gotten, based on the media blitz that has attended the PMRC and its rise to infamy, is that they have a special plan, and it has smelled like legislation up until now. There are too many things that look like hidden agendas involved with this. I'm a parent. I've got 4 children. I want them to grow up in a country where they can think what they want to think, be what they want to be, and not what somebody's wife or somebody in government makes them be. I don't want to have that, and I don't think you do either.
They say repeatedly, no legislation, no regulation, no government action. Certainly sounded pretty clear to me. And as far as a hidden agenda, I don't see one, hear one, or know of one.
Let me tell you why I've drawn these conclusions. First of all, they may say we are not interested in legislation, but there are others who do, and because of their project, bad things have happened in this country in the industry. You've got a very bad situation in San Antonio, Texas right now, where they're trying to pass PMRC-type individual ratings and attach them to live concerts, with the mayor down there trying to make a national reputation by putting San Antonio on the map as the first city in the United States to have these regulations, against the suggestion of the city attorney who says, I don't think this is constitutional. But, there's this fervor to get in and do even more, even more. It began with lyrics, but even looking at the PMRC fundraising letter in the last paragraph at the bottom of the page, it starts looking like it's branching into other areas when it says, we realize that this material has pervaded other aspects of society. And it's like, what? You're going to fix it all for me?
I think they're acknowledging some of the statements by some of their critics who say, well, why single out the music industry? But if I could have just half a minute more, Mr. Chairman. You do believe that there is a legitimate concern.
Yeah, but the legitimate concern is a matter of taste for the individual parent and how much sexual information that parent wants to give their child at what age, at what time, in what quantity. And I think that because there is a tendency in the United States to hide sex, which I think is an unhealthy thing to do, and many parents do not give their children good sexual education in spite of the fact that little books for kids are available, and other parents demand that sexual education be taken out of school, it makes the child vulnerable, because if you don't have something rational to compare it to, when you see or hear about something that is aberrated, you do not perceive it as an aberration.
Senator Gordon.
Mr. Zappa, I am astounded at the courtesy and soft-voiced nature of the comments of my friend, the senator from Tennessee. I can only say that I found your statement to be boorish, incredibly and insensitively insulting to the people who were here previously, that you could manage to give the First Amendment, the Constitution of the United States, a bad name if I felt that you had the slightest understanding of it, which I do not. I don't have the slightest understanding of the difference between government action and private action. And you have certainly destroyed any case you might otherwise have had with this senator.
Is this private action?
Do you believe that parents have the right and the obligation to mold the psychological development of their children?
Yeah, I think they have that right, and I also think they have that obligation.
Do you see any extreme difficulty in carrying out those obligations for a parent by material falling into the hands of their children over which they have little or no control?
One of the things that has been brought up before is talking about very young children getting access to the material that they've been showing here today. And what I've said to that in the past is a teenager may go into a record store unescorted with $8.98 in his pocket, but very young children do not. If they go into a record store, the $8.98 is in mom's pocket or dad's pocket, and they can always say, Johnny, buy a book. They can say, Johnny, buy instrumental music. There's some nice classical music here for you. Why don't you listen to that? The parent can guide the child in another direction, away from Sheena Easton, Prince, or whoever else you've been complaining about.
As I understand it from your testimony, and once again I want to emphasize that I see nothing wrong whatsoever. In fact, I salute the ladies for bringing this to the attention of the public as best they see fit, and I think you could tell from my testimony that I tend to agree with them, but I want to be very careful that we don't overstep our bounds and try and, I emphasize once again, telling somebody else what they should see. So I'm primarily worried about children. It seems to me from your statement that you have no obligation or no objection whatsoever to printing lyrics, if that would be legally possible, on record or tapes. Isn't that what you said?
I think it would be advisable for two reasons. One, it gives people one of the things that they've been asking for. It gives them that type of consumer protection, because if you can read the English language and you can see the lyrics on the back, you have no excuse for complaint if you take the record out of the store.
So if I understand you would be in support of printing the lyrics, but you are adamantly opposed to any kind of a rating system. Is that correct?
I'm opposed to the rating system because, as I said, if you put a rating on the record, it goes directly to the character of the person who made the record. Whether you like what's on the record or not, the guy who made it, that's his art. And to stigmatize him is not fair.
Well, likewise, if you're primarily concerned about the artists, is it not true that for many, many years we have had ratings of movies with indications as to the sexual content of movies, and that has been, as near as I can tell, a voluntary action on the part of the actors in the movies and the producers of the movie and the distributors? That seems to have worked reasonably well. What is wrong with that?
Well, first of all, it replaced something that was far more restrictive, which was the Hayes office. As far as that being voluntary, there are people who wish they did not have to rate their film. They still object to rating their films, but the reason the ratings go on is because if they're not rated, they won't get distributed or showed in theaters. So there is a little bit of pressure involved there.
Well, I think these hearings should not have been held if we're not considering legislation or regulations at this time. I emphasized earlier that they might follow. I simply want to say to you that I suspect that unless the industry, quote, cleans up their act, and I use that, end quote, word again, there's likely to be legislation. And it seems to me that it would not be too far removed from reality or too offensive to anyone if you could follow the general guidelines, right, wrong, or indifferent, that are now in place with regard to the movie industry.
Well, I would object to that. I think that, first of all, I believe it was you who asked the question of Mrs. Gore whether there was any other indication on the album as to the contents. And I would say that a buzzsaw blade between a guy's legs on the album cover is a good indication that it's not for little Johnny.
I don't believe I answered that question, but the point that you've made is a good one, because if that should not go to little mind, I think there should be at least some minimal activity or attempt on the part of the producers and the distributors, and indeed possibly the performers, to see that that does not get to that little mind. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Alex. I apologize for coming back in late, but I'm just hearing the latter part of it. I hear that you say that perhaps we could print the words, and I think that's a good suggestion. But it is unfair to have it rated. Now, it's not considered unfair in the movie industry, and I want you to elaborate. I don't want to belabor you, but why is it unfair? I mean, it's accurate, isn't it? I mean...
Well, I don't know whether it is accurate, because they sometimes have trouble deciding how a film gets to be an X or an R or whatever, and you have two problems. One is the quantity of material, 325 films per year versus 25,000 4-minute songs per year. You also have the problem that an album is a compilation of different types of cuts. If one song on the album is sexually explicit and all the rest of it sounds like Pat Boone, what do you get on the album? How are you going to rate it? You know, there are little technical difficulties here. And also you have the problem of having somebody in the position of deciding what's good, what's bad, what's talking about the devil, what's too violent, and, you know, and the rest of that stuff. But the point that I've made before is that when you rate the album, you're rating the individual because he takes personal responsibility for the music, and in the movies, the actors who are performing in the movie, it doesn't hurt them.
Well, very good. I think the actual printing of the content itself is perhaps even better than rating. Let everyone else decide for themselves.
I think you should leave it up to the parent, because not all parents want to keep their children totally ignorant.
Well, you and I would differ on what's ignorance and educated. I can see that, but...
No, I happen to think
I
that you're
can't
very
complain.
educated.
It was there, and they see what they're buying, and I think that would be a step in the right direction. But as Senator Exon has pointed out, whereby the primary movers here in this particular regard are not looking for legislation or regulations, that's our function. To be perfectly candid with you, I would look for regulations, some kind of legislation, if it could be constitutionally accomplished, unless, of course, we have these initiatives from the industry itself. And I think your suggestion is a good one, that they print those words. That would go a long way to satisfying everyone's objections, I think.
All we have to do is find out how it's going to be paid for.
Good enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawkins.
So you have 4 children?
Yes.
Have you ever purchased toys for those children?
No, my wife does.
Well, I might tell you that if you were to go in a toy store, which is very educational for fathers, by the way, it's not a maternal responsibility to buy toys for children, that you may look on the box, and the box says this is suitable for 5 to 7 years of age, or 8 to 15, or 15 and above, to give you some guidance for a toy for a child. Do you object to that?
In a way, I do, because that means that somebody in an office someplace is making a decision about how smart my child is.
I'd be interested to see what toys your kids ever had.
Why would you be interested?
Just as a point of interest in this.
Well, come on over to the house. I'll show them to you.
might do that. Have you ever do you make a profit from sales of rock records?
Yes.
Thank you. I think that statement tells the story to this committee. Thank you.
Mr. Zappa, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Notable snippets of audio from the hearing found their way into Frank Zappa's audio collage Porn Wars, released on the Frank Zappa Meets the Mothers of Prevention album. Senators Gore, Hollings, Gorton, Hawkins, and others appeared. The album cover featured a parody of the RIAA warning label. The LP included a note to listeners to send to Zappa's Barking Pumpkin Records for a free Z-Pack, a printed information package that included transcripts of the committee hearing and a letter from Zappa encouraging young people to register to vote. Zappa's full testimonial was released on a posthumous 2010 compilation called Congress Shall Make No Law. Dee Snider, singer of the band Twisted Sister, testified that he did not support RIAA President Gordokoff's unnecessary and unfortunate decision to agree to a so-called generic label on some selected records. Like John Denver, Snider felt that his music had been misinterpreted. He defended the Twisted Sister songs Under the Blade, which had been interpreted as referring to sadomasochism, bondage, and rape, and We're Not Gonna Take It, which had been accused of promoting violence. Snider said about Under the Blade, a song Snider claimed was written about an impending surgery, that the only sadomasochism, bondage, and rape in the song is in the mind of Mrs. Gore. He stated, Mrs. Gore was looking for sadomasochism and bondage, and she found it. Someone looking for surgical references would have found it as well. Snider concluded that the full responsibility for defending my children falls on the shoulders of my wife and I because there is no one else capable of making these judgments for us.
Mr. Snider, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here. I don't know if it's morning or afternoon. I'll say both. Good morning and good afternoon. I have been asked to come here to present my views on, quote, the subject of the content of certain sound recordings and suggestions that recording packages be labeled to provide a warning to prospective purchasers of sexually explicit or other potentially offensive content, unquote. There are many facets to this complex issue, and time does not permit me to address all of them. My feelings are expressed for the most part by the August 8, 1985 letter to the Parents Music Resource Center from Mr. Stanley Gordokoff, President of the Recording Industry Association of America. This letter was a formal response to the PMRC's petition of the RIAA. The only part of this document I do not support is Mr. Gordokoff's unnecessary and unfortunate decision to agree to a so-called generic label on some selected records. In my opinion, this should be retracted. Since I seem to be the only person addressing this committee today who has been a direct target of accusations from the presumably responsible PMRC, I would like to use this occasion to speak on a more personal note and show just how unfair the whole concept of lyrical interpretation and judgment can be, and how many times this can amount to little more than character assassination. Accusation number one. This attack was contained in an article written by Tipper Gore, which was given the form of a full page in my hometown newspaper on Long Island. In this article, Ms. Gore claimed that one of my songs, Under the Blade, had lyrics encouraging sadomasochism, bondage, and rape. The lyrics she quoted have absolutely nothing to do with these topics. On the contrary, the words in question are about surgery and the fear that it instills in people. As the creator of Under the Blade, I can say categorically that the only sadomasochism, bondage, and rape in this song is in the mind of Ms. Gore. Accusation number two. The PMRC has made public a list of 15 of what they feel are some of the most blatant songs lyrically. On this list is our song, We're Not Gonna Take It, upon which has been bestowed a V rating indicating violent lyrical content. You'll note from the lyrics before you that there is absolutely no violence of any type either sung about or implied anywhere in the song. It strikes me that the PMRC may have confused our video presentation for this song with the meaning of the lyrics. It's no secret that videos often depict storylines completely unrelated to the lyrics of the song they accompany. The video for We're Not Going to Take It was simply meant to be a cartoon with human actors playing variations on the Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote theme. Each stunt was selected from my extensive personal collection of cartoons. You'll note when you watch the entire video that after each catastrophe our villain suffers through, in the next sequence he reappears unharmed by any previous attack, no worse for the wear. Accusation number 3. Last Tuesday, a public forum regarding the lyric controversy was held in New York. Among the panelists was Ms. Gore. Trying to stem the virtual tidal wave of anti-rating sentiment coming from the audience, Ms. Gore made the following statement, quote, "I agree this is a small percentage of all music, thank goodness, but it's becoming more mainstream. You look at even the T-shirts the kids are wearing, and you see Twisted Sister and a woman in handcuffs sort of spread-eagled," unquote. This is an outright lie. Not only have we never sold a shirt of this type, we have always taken great pains to steer clear of sexism in our merchandise, records, stage show, and personal lives. Furthermore, we have always promoted the belief that rock and roll should not be sexist, but should cater to males and females equally. I feel that an accusation of this type is irresponsible, damaging to our reputation, and slanderous. I defy Ms. Gore to produce such a shirt to back up her claim. I'm tired of running into kids on the street who tell me that they can't play our records anymore because of the misinformation their parents are being fed by the PMRC on TV and in the newspapers. These are the only 3 accusations I've come across. All 3 are totally unfounded. Who knows what other false and irresponsible things have been said about me or my band. There happens to be one area where I'm in complete agreement with the PMRC, as well as the National PTA and probably most of the parents on this committee. That is, it is my job as a parent to monitor what my children see, hear, and read during their preteen years. The full responsibility for this falls on the shoulders of my wife and I because there is no one else capable of making these judgments for us. Parents can thank the PMRC for reminding them that there is no substitute for parental guidance, but that is where the PMRC's job ends. The beauty of literature, poetry, and music is that they leave room for the audience to put its own imagination, experiences, and dreams into the words. The examples I cited earlier showed clear evidence of Twisted Sister's music being completely misinterpreted and unfairly judged by supposedly well-informed adults. We cannot allow this to continue. There is no authority who has the right or the necessary insight to make these judgments. Not myself, not the federal government, not some recording industry committee, not the PTA, not the RIAA, and certainly not the PMRC. I'd like to thank the committee for this time, and I hope my testimony will aid you in clearing up this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Mr. Snyder, let's suppose that there is music which, say, glorifies incest. Do you think parents should know about it? Or do you think that it's just a matter between whoever is selling the record and whoever is buying it?
As I said in my testimony, I think it's very important that parents be aware of that these lyrics exist.
How could they find out about it?
Well, quite simply, as a parent myself and as a rock fan, I know that when I see an album cover with a severed goat's head in the middle of a pentagram between a woman's legs, that it's not the kind of album I want my son to be listening to.
Right.
If I read a title on the back of, say, somebody said Ice Cream Castle, a title called If the Kid Can't Make You Come, whatever it is, I realize that's a sexually explicit song. By just looking at the cover, looking at the lyrics, looking at the, I should say, the titles, that should cover just about all bases. The few albums that do not express their intentions on the cover or in the song titles, I think a parent could take it home, listen to it, and I don't think there's too many retail stores that would deny them the ability to return the album for something different.
Do you think that that most parents, or even kids for that matter, know everything that's on an album when they buy when a child buys an album?
I don't know half the things that are on half the albums I own.
Right.
Some of the bands I listen for musical reasons. Other bands I listen to for lyrical reasons. I know that AC/DC, one of my favorite bands, sings a lot of songs glorifying hell and damnation. I'm a Christian. I don't believe in, I don't want to go to hell, and I don't want to be damned for all time, but I do like the feel of the songs. The lyrics have no effect on me. Other bands who have more to say, I listen to their words and I learn from their words.
Do you think that now there is adequate basis for parents to know what's on the records that their kids are buying?
I think if they really are concerned, there is. But quite honestly, I don't think that the majority of parents are in reality as concerned as the PMRC or myself. I don't think they really want to spend the time to listen to what they might consider to be a bunch of noise. You know, they put it on and they can't understand the thing that's being said anyway. So I think most of them don't spend enough time with it.
Senator Hollings?
Yes, Mr. Snyder, I think I'll just take the opportunity to make an observation because you and I would differ as to what's obscene or what's shocking or what's vulgar. Persons of goodwill will differ on that particular score. I think that somewhere in this hearing record, we should not be on the defensive and we shouldn't create the atmosphere that we're powerless. The absolute nature of your statement that we don't have any authority, I only want to refer everyone to the Pacifica Foundation case, where the Federal Communications Commission was questioned as to its power to regulate public radio TV broadcasts that was indecent but not obscene. You see, they differed between what was indecent, what was obscene, and what was shocking. They had the 7 dirty words. I think everyone remembers that case on the West Coast. And the Supreme Court of the United States found out positively the FCC had the authority, had the responsibility, and I'm quoting from the language of the Supreme Court, patently offensive, indecent material presented over the airwaves confronts the citizen not only in public, but also in the privacy of the home where the individual's right to be left alone plainly outweighs the First Amendment rights of an intruder. So this isn't just a forum to rally one way or the other and hope something happens. This is a forum with a definite responsibility with respect to Congress and enunciating the duties of the Federal Communications Commission, which have been constitutionally followed. So I understand your opinion, and that's why we invited you up here to hear your words and not mine, but I think that the general nature of all this testimony of nothing censorship, First Amendment absolutism does not pertain with respect to the broadcast media, and that's, of course, the main media, I guess you would agree, to actually sell the record, wouldn't it not be?
Yes, because I'd like to clarify something. I said no authority has the right or necessary insight. I didn't say you weren't able to. I said you don't have the right, or I don't have the right, or the RIAA. Also, we're talking about the airwaves as opposed to a person going with their money to purchase an album to play in their room, their home, on their own time. The airwaves is something different. I think that the FCC and even MTV have done a fair job in keeping profanity, obscenity, and things like that off the public airwaves. But as far as when you listen into your own home, that's something totally different, I feel.
Yeah, I think that record ought to be elaborated to show just that. Previously, about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, before this committee, we had the TV networks. And pursuant to that particular hearing, they again came back, I remember specifically CBS, and they demonstrated how they had this film, and then they got together with their producer and removed certain scenes of violence and certain 4-letter words and did not offend the producer's sense of art and the production itself. So we've made some progress, but bottom line with respect to these particular records, the Supreme Court has found that there is that right and that responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, are you going to tell me you're a big fan of my music as well?
No, I'm not. I'm not a fan of your
sorry,
music.
Mr. Gore.
I'm aware that Frank Zappa and John Denver cover quite a spectrum, and I do enjoy them both. I am not, however, a fan of Twisted Sister, and I will readily say that. In Surge, you say your song, Under the Blade, is about surgery. Have you ever had surgery with your hands tied and your legs strapped?
The song was written about my guitar player, Eddie Ojeda. He was having polyps removed from his throat, and he was very fearful of this operation. And I said, Eddie, while you're in a hospital, I'm going to write a song for you. I said it was about the fear of operations. I think people imagine being helpless on a table, a bright light in their face, the blade coming down on them, and having totally afraid that they may wake up, who knows, dead, handicapped. There's a certain fear of hospitals. That's in my imagination what I see the hospitals like.
Is there a reference to the hospital in the song?
No, there isn't, but there isn't a reference to a woman, sadomasochism, or bondage, yes, I'm sorry.
There's just a reference to someone whose hands are tied down and whose legs are strapped down, and he's going under the blade to be cut.
Yes, there is.
So it's not really a wild leap of the imagination to jump to the conclusion that that's about something other than surgery or hospitals, neither of which are mentioned in the song.
No, it's not a wild jump, and I think what I said in one part was that songs allow a person to put their own imagination, experiences, and dreams into the lyrics. People can interpret it many ways. Ms. Gore was looking for sadomasochism and bondage, and she found it. Someone looking for surgical references would have found it as well.
Why do you think there is so much sadomasochism and bondage in some of these new songs?
I cannot speak for the other artists. I can really am only here to defend myself, and hopefully by speaking for myself as one person, songwriter in a band that I feel has been unjustly dumped on, that will just warn us of the dangers of what we're trying to do here. I really can't speak for the other bands.
Now, you said that you can look at the titles of albums and look at the covers and tell what kind of material is inside. Does the title Purple Rain give you an indication that the material is about masturbation?
You mean the album title, Purple Rain,
yeah.
Not the song title? Yeah. No, it doesn't. I didn't say in all cases. I believe I covered that those occasional albums that are a bit misleading. That, like I said, I don't think a store would refuse a parent who came in and said, I don't like what's on this record, I would like my money back.
So the choice the parent has then is to sit down and listen to every song on the album, right?
Or read the lyrics if they're on the record.
What if they're not on the... I think there's pretty general agreement that if the lyrics are printed, that's one possible solution for this. Let's suppose the lyrics aren't printed. Then what choice does a parent have? To sit down and listen to every song on the album?
Well, if they're really concerned about it, I think that they have to.
Now, the only thing that I felt at all comfortable about in your statement was when you said that you shared some of the concerns of the PMRC. I would simply hope that artists and record companies will find a way to manifest that concern in some self-restraint and show of responsibility to give parents a break. You're right, it's tough being a parent. It's even tougher being a kid. If both are going to be able to deal with the kind of material that's coming out in popular music, it seems to me the industry has a responsibility to give them a little help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rockpower.
Mr. Snyder, do you feel that you have a responsibility as an artist in terms of those words that you write, a responsibility for those who would hear those words?
I feel a tremendous responsibility, and as I said, I don't put anything down on a record that I can't stand behind in my beliefs 100%. I don't sing about drugs, sex, alcohol, because I don't advocate sexism, the use of drugs, and drinking. So I don't write about those things. I only write about things I believe in.
Do you think that parents, not only those who are in PMRC, but other parents who are concerned here and across the country about the development of new trends in music and the lyrics that go along with that music, are naive or somehow missing the point? Do you think that they're unduly worried about some of these developments and writings about sadomasochism, suicide, rape, other things? I mean, do you think that's really not that serious a problem for this country and our young people?
That's like sort of a multiple question. I don't think they're naive, and I don't think that at times they're unduly worried, but I do think sometimes they take it overly serious. I mean, there are monster movies on all the time. They've been going on for ages, and people watch a monster movie and they get scared and they walk away, and it was just a movie. Rock and roll, many times, is the same thing, trying to get an effect either of laughter, of sadness. A lot of the heavy metal bands are trying to scare people and just make them just like a horror movie. Vincent Price isn't getting have problems because he's done all these monster pictures. He's just an actor. I'm not going to say I'm just an actor, but I am entertaining people, and a lot of these bands are entertaining people. And when they were reading some of these lyrics before, I couldn't help but laugh. I mean, I hadn't heard some of them, but some of the lyrics were ridiculously ridiculous. I mean, you know, and even a kid reading that, I think would go, oh my God, what's going on? You know, it's ridiculous. Is the only word I can think of. Some of the lyrics.
On November 1st, 1985, before the hearing ended, the RIAA agreed to put parental advisory labels on selected releases at their own discretion. The labels were generic, unlike the original idea of a descriptive label categorizing the explicit lyrics. The parental advisory label is a warning placed on audio recordings in recognition of excessive profanities or inappropriate references, with the intention of alerting parents of potentially unsuitable material for younger children. The label was first affixed on records, compact discs, and cassette tapes, and it has been included on digital listings offered by online music stores to accommodate the growing popularity of the latter platform. Recordings with the parental advisory label are often released alongside censored versions that reduce or eliminate the questionable material. Several retailers will distribute all varieties of the product, occasionally with an increased price for the censored versions, while some sellers offer the amended pressings as their main options and choose not to distribute the explicit counterparts. However, the label has been questioned for its perceived ineffectiveness in limiting the amount of inappropriate material that young audiences are exposed to. In 1990, the now standard black and white warning label design reading Parental Advisory Explicit Lyrics was introduced and was to be placed on the bottom right-hand section of a given product. The first album to bear the parental advisory label was the 1990 release of Banned in the USA by the rap group 2 Live Crew. By May 1992, approximately 225 records had been marked with the warning. In response to later hearings in the following years, it was reworded as Parental Advisory Explicit Content in 1996. The system went unchanged until 2002, when record labels affiliated with BMG began introducing specific areas of concern, including strong language, violent content, or sexual content on compact discs alongside the generic parental advisory label. The PAL was first used on music streaming services and online music stores in 2011. That year, the British Phonographic Industry, or BPI, revised its own music censorship policies to incorporate the more prominent usage of the warning label. The Parental Advisory Label Program in the United States and the Parental Advisory Scheme in the United Kingdom lack agreed-upon standards for using the warning label, although they provide guidelines for its recommended inclusion. Although a voluntary practice that is ultimately left to the discretion of record labels, the RIAA suggests that material with strong language or depictions of violence, sex, or substance abuse, to such an extent as to merit parental notification, be affixed with the parental advisory label. The BPI additionally requests that racist, homophobic, misogynistic, or other discriminatory language or behavior be taken under consideration when determining the appropriateness of a record. Physical copies of albums which have the label generally have it as a permanent part of the artwork, being printed with the rest of the cover. In some cases, the label is affixed as a sticker to the front of the case, which can be removed by putting the artwork in a different case. Audio recordings that include parental advisory labels in their original formats are generally released in censored versions that reduces or completely eliminates the questionable material. They are recognized as clean editions by the RIAA and are left unlabeled in their revised formats. American retailers, including Best Buy and FYE, distribute explicit and censored records. Target has sold both varieties of a given record, although has occasionally offered only the explicit version, depending on the product. Walmart and their affiliated properties are well known for only carrying censored versions of records. In one instance, the retailer refused to distribute 21st Century Breakdown by Green Day because they were not given the clean copies that they requested. Online music stores, including the iTunes Store, generally have the parental advisory logo embedded into their digital files. Since 2015, digital providers such as iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon Music tag tracks as explicit if they have been identified as such. This frequently includes tracks from older albums that predate the use of the label or were released afterward but do not feature the label on physical releases. Since its introduction, the effectiveness of the parental advisory label has frequently been called into question. John Wiederhorn from MTV News suggested that artists benefited from the label and noted that younger customers interested in explicit content could more easily find it with the label attached. On behalf of Westward, Andy Thomas said that the label was purposeless on the grounds that a young customer would get a copy of the album sooner or later from a friend. In his own experience, he noted that its intended reaction in parents was varied. His lax mother was indifferent towards the warning, while the mother of his stricter friend did not allow her child to listen to the records. Danny Goldberg from Gold Village Entertainment opined that the parental advisory label offered minimal value other than being a way for certain retailers like Walmart to brand themselves as family-friendly. He felt that children were successful in getting content they desired even before the internet and believed that the label had little impact on sales figures. In contrast, the RIAA maintains that it's not a PAL notice that kids look for, it's the music. They stated that research they had gathered revealed that kids put limited weight on lyrics in deciding which music they like, caring more about rhythm and melody, and implied that the label is not a deciding factor for a given purchase. Tom Cole from NPR commented that the parental advisory label has become a fact of music buying life, which made it difficult for current consumers to understand the widespread controversy that came about from its introduction. Greg Beato of Reason observed that by the 1990s a hip-hop album that didn't warrant a tipper sticker was artistically suspect. It is fairly common for an album which received the parental advisory seal to be sold alongside an edited version, which removes objectionable content, usually to the same level as a radio edit. However, the RIAA Uniform Guidelines say an edited version need not remove all potentially objectionable content from the sound recording. These albums are packaged nearly identically to their explicit counterparts, usually with the only indicator being the lack of parental advisory seal, although if the artwork is explicit too, it will normally be censored. In the case of some albums, a black box reading edited version is placed where the parental advisory seal would be. This was part of new guidelines introduced on April 1, 2002, which also included a label that featured edited version also available next to the parental advisory seal. Sometimes an artist will deliberately change the title or artwork of an edited version as to reflect the censorship. The edited version of an album will normally edit to the level in which the content will be considered appropriate for radio airplay. Strong language is almost always edited out, in addition to racial slurs. Specific drug references are also usually edited out, primarily slang terms for illegal drugs. Many record stores refuse to sell albums containing the label, most notably Walmart, and others limited sales of those albums to adults. One of the albums to receive the parental advisory sticker was Frank Zappa's Grammy-winning album Jazz from Hell, presumably for the use of the word hell in its title, but also for the song G-Spot Tornado, even though it is a collection of instrumental pieces and contains no lyrics at all. It is uncertain whether the tipper sticker is effective in preventing children from being exposed to explicit content. Some, citing the forbidden fruit effect, suggest that the sticker in fact increases record sales. Philip Bailey of Earth, Wind & Fire said that for the most part the sticker might even sell more records in some areas. All you gotta do is tell somebody that this is a no-no and that's what they want to go hear.
I have 3 children and I believe that they should be protected from violent and pornographic rock and that it is the responsibility of the music industry to reform itself. In the 50s, Elvis Presley sang, I want you, I need you, I love you, or come along and be my teddy bear. Now, Morris Day and the Times sings, if the kid can't make you come, nobody can. I want to get you off, baby. What does it take to get you off? Sex is healthy, but it's not an animal act. In the heavy metal industry, for example, where you have songs that deal with forcing a woman to have oral sex at gunpoint, as in Judas Priest on the album Defenders of the Faith, Eat Me Alive, in which he sings, sounds like an animal panting to the beat, groan in the pleasure zone, gasping from the heat, gut-wrenching frenzy that deranges every joint. I'm going to force you at gunpoint to eat me alive. Love is not Prince singing, if your man ain't no good, come on over to my neighborhood, jump in the sack, and I'll jack you off. I-F-U-C-K, like a beast, animal. And is this the kind of album that you want your child to come home with? No.
Many musicians have criticized or parodied the PMRC and Tipper Gore. In a world with major pollution and guns ablaze, John Lydon marveled, they have to pick on someone using foul language. In 1987, the punk rock band NoFX released an EP titled The PMRC Can Suck on This. Danzig's 1988 song Mother scored a top 50 hit as the most famous song about the PMRC labeling and its inherent problems. Mother, tell your children not to walk my way. Tell your children not to hear my words. What they mean, what they say, Mother. This is still one of the only songs about Tipper Gore and the PMRC to reach a wide audience. Flotsam and Jetsam's song Hard on You from their 1988 album No Place for Disgrace is a direct reference to the PMRC, with several lines such as, one that's young sees the circled R, does he buy it? Can't you see you're ripping away our independence? And, if your committee is so damn right, why did we write this song? The Megadeth song Hook in Mouth from their 1988 album So Far So Good So What is aimed at the PMRC. Ice-T's 1989 album The Iceberg Freedom of Speech Just Watch What You Say contains many criticisms of the PMRC. One song in particular, Freedom of Speech, is an extended attack on Tipper Gore. On You Shoulda Killed Me Last Year, his spoken word outro to his album OG Original Gangster, he curses the CIA, the LAPD, FBI, George H.W. Bush, and Tipper Gore. One of the bonus tracks on Warrant's 1990 album Cherry Pie, titled Ode to Tipper Gore, is a montage of short audio clips from various live performances by the band featuring ample use of expletives and obscene language. The liner notes of Sonic Youth's 1990 album Goo include a cartoon with the caption, Smash the PMRC. Cinderella referenced the PMRC in their song Shelter Me from their Heartbreak Station album with the lines, Tipper led the war against the record industry. She said she saw the devil on her MTV. The 1990 Dead Milkmen song Do the Brown Nose includes the lyrics, You, yes you, here's a dime, run out and call the PMRC. Wasp's live album Live in the Raw includes the song Harder Faster, which Blackie Lawless dedicates during the opening of the song to the PMRC. New York-based thrash band Anthrax wrote and composed a song called Startin' Up a Posse for their 1991 release Attack of the Killer Bees. The song ridicules the members of the PMRC. On July 18, 1993, Rage Against the Machine protested against the PMRC at Lollapalooza 3 by standing naked on stage with duct tape covering their mouths and the letters PMRC on their chests. Punk rock band The Ramones recorded for their 1992 album Mondo Bizarro how rock and rap albums were being censored by the PMRC. It mentions Frank Zappa, Ozzy Osbourne, and is addressed to Tipper Gore. The 1997 Canadian punk band Reset's album No Worries features a track entitled Go Away, which is entirely about their disapproval of the PMRC and Tipper Gore. On the 2001 Dead Kennedys live album Mutiny on the Bay, recorded at a 1986 concert, during their song MTV Get Off the Air, lead singer Jello Biafra tells the audience to buy a homemade record instead before the PMRC closes down the stores that sell them. Biafra had earlier been brought to trial on charges of distributing harmful matter to minors and an incident involving the 1985 Dead Kennedys album Frankenchrist, which featured an insert of H.R. Giger's Penis Landscape and a parody sticker on the front cover reading, Warning, the inside fold-out to this record cover is a work of art by H.R. Giger that some people may find shocking, repulsive, or offensive. Life can sometimes be that way. Suicidal Tendencies reference Tipper Gore in their song Lovely from the album Lights Camera Revolution. Tipper babe, don't you remember me? Now I'm kinder, gentler, and so happy. Bad Religion cryptically references the PMRC in its song I Want to Conquer the World from the album No Control. Hey, moral soldier, you've got righteous proclamations and precious tomes to fuel your pulpy conflagrations.
But in all candor, I would tell you it's outrageous filth, and we've got to do something about it. And that if I could find some way constitutionally to do away with it, I would.
Today the music has far eclipsed what was on the cutting edge in the mid-'80s. What was being considered as actionable then could be aired on family television today. I still feel the same. Censorship is wrong and should be fought on every front. And it is that fire that has kept me obsessed with this for years. Thank you for listening to Eclectic Obsessions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe on iTunes. Leave me a review. All 5-star reviews will be read on the show. You can follow the show on Facebook at Eclectic Obsessions, on Twitter at Eclectic Obsess1, on Instagram at Eclectic Obsessions Podcast, and on YouTube at Eclectic Obsessions. I'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to email the show at ecobpod@gmail.com. We'll be back in 1 month's time with a new Eclectic Obsession.